إعلان مهم.
重要提示
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Anuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة.
为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для того, чтобы устный перевод был полным и качественным, необходимо выступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Bien.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I hereby declare open the 7th meeting of the 60th session of the Human Rights Council. I wish to remind you that this meeting will last until 1:15 p.m. I wish also to remind you that the Division of Conference Management has prepared an online survey concerning the quality of conference services provided at this meeting. Participants in the room may access the survey by scanning the displayed QR code using your smartphone or tablet devices. Your feedback is important to DCM in their efforts to provide more efficient and effective meetings. I would therefore encourage everyone to participate in the survey. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, we will continue the interactive dialogue with Special Rapporteur on the right to development. We continue with the list of speakers. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Togo.
Madame la Vice-Présidente,
Madam Vice President, my delegation thanks the Special Rapporteur for the report.
and in particular welcomes the analysis tool, which wisely emphasizes the pressing need to assess the role of women and girls in implementing the right to development. It is useful to recall that the participatory approach is important for individual development and the implementation of harmonious development models within each society. On that basis, Togo over the years has made male-female equality a central pillar in development and implementation of public policies. For example, since 2018, Togo has had a quota
marché public aux jeunes et aux femmes entrepreneurs et attribue aux femmes au moins 30% des zones aménagées.
and gives women at least 30% of the agricultural land. Togo encourages all actors in development at all levels further to support the least developed countries for effective implementation of the right development, and we call for stronger action in a spirit of solidarity to reduce the debt burden on the LDCs so that they may better finance inclusive development. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Holy See takes note of the report of the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Development, in which he points out that achieving this right requires equality for women and girls. Such equality is rooted in the dignity of every man and woman, which is inalienably grounded in his or her very being, which prevails in and beyond every circumstance. This God-given dignity must always be at the heart of all development efforts if we are to build a world in which everyone can lead an authentically human life in truth, justice, and peace, as Pope Leo XIV said. When women and girls are able to fulfill their potential, the benefits extend far beyond the individual. Families are strengthened, social cohesion is reinforced, and the common good is advanced. Madam Vice President, 30 years after the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, one truth bears repeating. Women play a critical role in the family. The family is the basic unit of the society and as such should be strengthened. This requires policies that support both motherhood and family, as well as the principle of shared responsibility between women and men. Sadly, the report states that to realize social development, women should enjoy autonomy over decisions concerning abortion. This implies that social development is linked to the denial of the right to life to the child in the womb. This creates a paradox, precisely in an age when the inviolable rights of persons are solemnly proclaimed and the value of life is publicly affirmed, the very right to life is being denied. We should be honest and admit that it is by addressing these issues that we can reach social development and the good of the world's women, and not by proposing false solutions such as denying another person's inviolable right to life, which is always a failure of law, of justice, and ultimately of the entire society. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Zimbabwe welcomes the report by the Special Rapporteur on the right to development on the nexus between gender equality and the right to development. We concur with the Special Rapporteur's assertion on the positive relation between gender equality and the four facets of the right to development. We agree equally that gender equality is intrinsically linked to human development, and that gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. Our legislative framework prohibits gender-based discrimination. We have implemented the national gender policy and ratified regional and international legal instruments promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. In 2023, we integrated gender as a cross-cutting theme in our country's development strategy. We believe that gender equality is not only a fundamental right, but a necessity for national growth. Zimbabwe remains steadfast in its commitment to empowering women and girls, and will continue to strengthen policies that ensure women's full participation in economic and social development. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. South Africa aligns itself fully with the statement delivered by the African Group and the NAM Group. We wish to thank the Special Rapporteur for his timely and insightful report. We welcome the emphasis on the mutually reinforcing relationship between gender equality and the right to development. For South Africa, this nexus is not theoretical, it is foundational. Our constitution enshrines both gender equality and the right to development as a non-negotiable pillars of justice and dignity. Yet we remain concerned that patriarchal norms, structural inequalities, and underrepresentation of women, especially in decision-making, continue to obstruct inclusive development across the Global South. The right to development cannot be realized without dismantling these barriers. We echo the Special Rapporteur's call for intersectional approaches, inclusive participation, and fair distribution of resources, gender-responsive budgeting, equitable access to education, and full and equal and meaningful representation of women in governance are essential to achieving substantive equality. South Africa urges member states to reaffirm their commitment to Beijing Declaration and to integrate gender equality into all dimensions of development policy. We must move beyond rhetoric to action because when women thrive, nations prosper. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
Madam Vice President, I would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for his valuable report on the nexus between gender equality and the right to development. The report reiterated that true gender equality is not a request limited to women and girls, but a main pillar to the development of societies, to peace, stability, and prosperity. In this context, Jordan adopted a number of policies and legislations that promote women participation in the public life and private life, including the National Strategy for Women and action plans linked to SDGs, namely SDG number 5. My country gives due importance to combating all forms of violence based on discrimination, and you have national mechanisms for reporting and protection in cooperation with civil society and international partners. We secure efficient participation of women and girls in implementing and drafting development policies at all levels, be it at the level of municipal councils or national initiatives. In the face of new global challenges such as climate change, crisis, and conflicts, we are adopting inclusive policies at the level of national response and the impact of these crises on women and girls. We reiterate the importance of international cooperation and development assistance as a main tool to promote gender equality, and we reiterate our commitment to working with all partners in order to achieve a sustainable and inclusive development that is beneficial to all.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Madam Vice President, my delegation takes note the report of the Special Rapporteur. The Lao PDR reiterates that all human rights, including the right to development, are universal, indivisible, interdependent, interrelated, and mutually reinforcing. We emphasize that advancing the rights to development of women and girls is highly imperative. The Lao PDR has promoted inclusive and sustainable development for all, including women and girls without discrimination. The gender equality has been recognized and guaranteed by the Constitution and the various national legislation. Furthermore, the promotion of gender equality and advancement of women have been mainstreamed into the National Socio-Economic Development Plan, aligning with its commitment to implement Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 5. Currently, the Lao PDR is implementing various plans, such as Strategic Development Plan for Lao Women's 2030, the National Strategy and Action Plan on Gender Equality. In this connection, the Lao PDR stands ready to strengthening collaboration with all UN agency development partners and stakeholders to ensure gender equality and empower women and girls in the country. I thank you, Madam President, Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chad.
Merci. Thank you, Vice President. Chair, thanks to Special Rapporteur on the Right to Development for presenting his report and supports the statements made by the groups to which it belongs. The right to development for us is one of the main priorities, and this should be at the center of a social order that allows the enjoyment of all human rights. Despite the progress made, there are still major obstacles to overcome in order to achieve the goal of sustainable development and bridge the huge inequalities among countries, including in terms of access to basic services. We would be in favor of measures that seek to establish a development model that provides responses to the structural crises that in particular are affecting the least developed countries, including an access to education and other matters. Chad has considerable resources, both in agriculture and in the subsoil, as well as its vibrant population. And these are an important capital that needs to be drawn upon carefully so that we can truly contribute to development. We need to ensure that the Council's work can fully contribute in full equality to the right development, which includes the right of everybody to a sufficient standard of living and access to water and sanitation.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
السيد الرئيس، نشكر السيد سيريا ديفا على جهوده القيمة في الاطلاع
Thank you. We thank the Special Rapporteur for her efforts. And women's effective participation in all areas of life on an equal footing is crucial for development. The UN the Declaration on the Right to Development prohibits gender discrimination. Under SDG 5, there is an emphasis on gender equality and women's empowerment. Internationally, Qatar's women play a crucial role in development and benefit from government support and access to empowerment in all economic, social, and political sectors. This is part of our vision for 2030, which seeks to identify the steps for economic development and social prosperity. Through various sectoral strategies and policies, Qatar has worked for women's empowerment, providing them to benefit in all sectors through an approach that ends discrimination against women and girls, emphasizing socioeconomic aspects. We held the recent summit on social development last year in Doha, which was a milestone, and we hope will strengthen work.
Representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Pakistan thanks Special Rapporteur for presenting his report, of which we have taken note. Empowering women and girls is central to their ability to participate and contribute to and benefit from development. The government of Pakistan is committed to protecting and promoting the human rights of women and girls, including the right to development. Targeted initiatives such as the Benazir Income Support Program have sought to empower women and girls, especially those in vulnerable situations, particularly in rural areas. Others, including the Nashanuma Program and Zero Out of School Children campaign, have focused on nutrition and education with a distinct focus on women and girls. These gains, however, are not irreversible. Among several challenges, armed conflicts and natural disasters are an acute threat to the enjoyment of human rights by women and girls. Currently, large parts of Pakistan have been once again experiencing catastrophic flooding caused by drastically changing climatic conditions. Disruptions in sharing of hydrological data have only worsened matters and heightened risks. Mr. Special Rapporteur, we will welcome your insights on how to ensure climate resilience in empowerment programs targeting women and girls from a right to development perspective. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
شكرا السيدة.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My country's delegation would like to thank the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Development for his report on the nexus between gender equality and right to development. At the national level, our constitution reiterates the equality between male and female citizens when it comes to rights and obligations, especially when it comes to lifting barriers to equal participation in social, economic, and cultural life. We work on empowering women politically and economically through increasing their representation in decision-making spheres, as well as leadership positions and equality in employment. We lifted our reservation to Article 15 of the CEDAW. Our economic and social measures are based on equal chances and aim at including women in the development process with all its aspects. In the same context, we give due importance to capacity building and training of individuals so that they can take part in the development process. We reiterate the importance of international cooperation and solidarity in order to reach a social order that will allow everyone to enjoy the right to development. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sovereign Order of Malta. Looks like Malta is absent. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Believes that
Please
gender
use the
equality...
microphone and start again, please.
Okay. Mr. President, Portugal thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report on the mutually reinforcing nexus between gender equality and the right to development. Portugal believes that gender equality is a precondition for sustainable development. We are committed to integrating a gender perspective across all development policies and programs in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Beijing Platform of Action. In our view, this requires dismantling structural barriers such as persistent gender pay gaps, unequal access to quality education, limited participation in leadership and decision-making positions, discriminatory laws or social norms, and inadequate access to technology and financial resources. Addressing these barriers is crucial for women and girls to fully exercise their rights and contribute to sustainable development. Mr. Special Rapporteur, can you share some best practices on how states can successfully track the gender impact of their budgets and programs? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire.
Madame la Vice-Présidente.
Madam Vice President, Côte d'Ivoire aligns with the statements by the groups to which it belongs and thanks the Special Rapporteur for the thematic report which emphasizes the close link between gender equality and the effective right to development. We welcome this analysis, which rightly recalls that gender equality is not only a matter of social justice and respecting human rights, but also crucial for the implementation of the SDGs. Côte d'Ivoire supports the idea that women's full participation in economic, social, and political life is essential to build inclusive, resilient, prosperous societies. Women's empowerment and that of girls should be a cross-cutting priority in all public development policies. Our government has adopted and implemented a number of strategic instruments for gender equality, including the Law on Parity, the National Women's Empowerment Programme, the systematic integration of the gender approach in sectoral plans and budgets in line with the 2063 Agenda of the African Union and the 2030 Agenda of the UN. We reiterate our support to the mandate of the Special Rapporteur and encourage continuing the work to promote a holistic, inclusive approach to the right to development, which places gender equality at the heart of collective action. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jamaica.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Jamaican delegation notes the Special Rapporteur's report and welcomes the focus on the mutually reinforcing nexus between gender equality and the right to development. My delegation supports a number of the recommendations contained in the report, including at paragraphs 92, 93, and 94D. We firmly believe that the recommendations set out in the report must translate into concrete actions that ensure greater equity and equality for women and girls. At the national level, the 2011 National Policy for Gender Equality and the 2017 to 2027 National Strategic Action Plan to eliminate gender-based violence, the 2023 Domestic Violence Amendment Act, the 2021 Sexual Harassment Prevention and Protection Act, and the 1976 Employment, Equal Pay for Men and Women Act provide a strong legal and policy framework for ensuring gender equality, empowerment of women and girls, and overall sustainable development. Jamaica calls on member states to recommit at all levels to address gender inequality, leaving no woman or girl behind, as a critical dimension to realizing the right to development. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of plurinational state of Bolivia.
Gracias, Vice.
Thank you, Vice President. We thank the Special Rapporteur for the report, and we agree with the vision, the right to development, and gender are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. We point to the fact that within backsliding on gender equality, it is crucial to ensure that this is a right that cannot depend on political trends. We must uphold the progress made and that contained in the Pact for the Future, ensuring that gender equality is supported and that all violence against women ends. In our national programs and our development efforts, we have sought to build shelters and housing for women. Combating violence is essential in order to make progress on the right to development, economic, social, cultural, and political development. We subscribe to the recommendations by the rapporteur on this 30th anniversary of Beijing and call on the international community to continue its efforts to achieve equality. Thank you.
Thank you. This was the last speaker we could accommodate for this debate. We will now turn to the list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. I give the floor to Qatar National Human Rights Committee.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the report of the Special Rapporteur and the working group have contributed significantly in shedding light on the obstacles that hinder the right to development, for example, inequality and gender-based violence, as well as the absence of social empowerment and just representation of women and girls in developmental policies. In our perspective, we have the Qatari National Vision 2030 and the third National Strategy for Development 2024-2030. We have taken all effort to make sustainable development and gender equality must in order to review all the policies and strategies and legislation related to development, carry a human rights perspective, and to monitor violations and to receive complaints by the most vulnerable groups. We would like to extend our thanks to the Special Rapporteur and the working group for their efforts. Their reports have been an inspiration to all of us as a national institution for human rights, and we hope that the international covenant would be a roadmap for the achievement of security and peace. Thank you.
I give the floor to Center for Reproductive Rights, Inc.
Madam Vice President, the Center for Reproductive Rights, Illegal World, and the Sexual Rights Initiative welcome the report's assertion that there can be no gender equality, including sexual and reproductive health and rights, without the right to development and vice versa. The false divide between development and gender equality has been weaponized to undermine hard-won progress in gender equality and human rights threatening the foundation of inclusive rights-based development with disproportionate impact on women, girls, and persons with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression and sex characteristics. As highlighted by the Special Rapporteur, access to sexual and reproductive health is essential to ensure all people can meaningfully participate in and benefit from the right to development. This includes abortion and gender-affirming care. The right to development is also vital to address deep-rooted structural inequalities such as gender stereotypes, intersecting forms of discrimination, and legacies of the slavery and colonial past. The right to development must address the economic challenges and barriers perpetuated by the dominant economic paradigm that continue preventing women, girls, and persons with diverse ideas to enjoy their sexual reproductive health, bodily and reproductive autonomy. We call on this Council to uphold the universality of human rights so all people can enjoy and participate in the right to development free from discrimination and violence, and equality can finally be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Akata for a video statement.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Kahata takes the floor to express the fact that it welcomes the recognition by the Special Rapporteur of the climate crisis on human rights, especially on peasant populations, indigenous people and people of African descent, and those who defend territory and natural resources, as well as the responsibility of Honduras and private business to guarantee that those rights are not violated. We recognize the underscoring of structural inequalities that affect these groups and women, girls, and adolescents, including those with disabilities. But we regret the fact that key topics such as the lack of recognition legally of LGBTIQ families and the violation of their right to care are still an issue. This was recently recognized as an autonomous right by the Inter-American Court. It affects older persons and their children. We are concerned about the fact that there is an ideological blockage on sexual and reproductive rights and sex education driven by conservative lobbies and a rise in forced pregnancies among girls and teenagers. Likewise, there's a prohibition on abortion in Honduras, and the severity of this needs to be emphasized. We call on the Special Rapporteur to ensure that Honduras ratifies the Escazú Agreement and call on the Rapporteur and the Council to recommend urgent ratification of the Inter-American Conventions against Racism and all forms of discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to British Humanist Association.
We would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for his report, particularly his recognition that cultural and religious values should be used to promote rather than undermine gender equality. We emphasize that the right to freedom of religion and belief must never be misinterpreted to justify restricting women's rights. Individuals must be able to adopt, change, or practice a religion or belief according to their own conscience, including when this challenges societal expectations. State-enforced gender-based persecution under repressive theocratic regimes remains deeply concerning. However, a well-connected transnational religiously conservative network of civil society actors spanning Europe, the United States, and Russia is increasingly driving resistance to gender equality by promoting policy shifts in societal norms across continents. They have mobilized partner organizations to spread misinformation and stigma to discourage abortion in the UK, to target and harass women's rights activists in Kenya and Ghana, and to shape education systems in a way that reinforces patriarchal ideas about society and family life in Chile. Such political and societal influence impedes women's education, health, economic opportunity, and civic participation, directly undermining their right to development. These efforts are often explicitly justified through appeals to religious values. How can the Special Rapporteur encourage states to protect the right to freedom of religion and belief for all women, to promote gender equality against pressures from religious fundamentalist groups?
Thank you. I give the floor to Association for Defending Victims of Terrorism.
Mr. President, on 13th of June 2025, Israel launched a war against Iran in violation of Article 2.4 of the Charter of the United Nations. During the war, nearly 1,000 civilians were killed, including women and children, as well as 14 nuclear scientists who had dedicated their lives to scientific research to ensure Iran's right to development. In addition, the country's infrastructure, including nuclear facilities, refineries, airports, and other public facilities, were targeted, causing extensive damage and disrupting services to citizens. Assassinating scientists and destroying infrastructure of any country is a major obstacle to improving the living conditions of its people and may set back economic, social, cultural, and political development for years. Israel's war against Iran was continuation of violation of all norms of international law in Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria, which, according to a statement by UN independent experts, form part of a broader pattern of unlawful unilateral acts by Israel, which are considered international crimes punished under the Rome Statute. Therefore, we call on the SR and the Right to Development to condemn and to investigate aspects of the war in his next report. Furthermore, member states must take necessary measures to stop Israel's wars so that the sustainable peace and security in the region is not destroyed anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Global Institute for Water, Environment and Health by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. India reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the realization of the right to development, guided by the principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The word is one family. Through G20 presidency, India advanced consensus on climate action, digital infrastructure, and equitable growth, including securing permanent membership for the African Union and adopting the Green Development Pact to accelerate the SDGs. India's climate leadership is also reflected in the International Solar Alliance, mobilizing clean energy investment for more than 120 countries, alongside ambitious domestic renewable expansion and innovation in green technologies. In humanitarian diplomacy, India has acted swiftly and without preconditions, from Operation Dust in Turkey and Syria to humanitarian missions in the Indian Ocean region, while advocating at the UN for ceasefires and humanitarian access in conflict zones, including Gaza. Moreover, through the Indian AI mission, India is shaping global norms on ethical, inclusive, and development-oriented artificial intelligence. By aligning sustainable development with human rights principles, India contributes to building a balanced and inclusive global order where the right to development is realized for all, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to China NGO Network for International Exchanges by video.
Yeah. "30 years ago, China hosted the UN Fourth Conference on Women. Since then, China has upheld gender equality as a fundamental national policy, implemented national actions to support women's holistic development, and actively encourage women's participation. In 2021, China launched the Global Development Initiative, recognizing that sustained progress in gender equality and women's empowerment is essential to achieving broader SDG targets. In this spirit, Chinese civil society organizations have taken proactive steps across various regions. China's women's federations have initiated programs such as household management and handicraft training. In developing countries like Laos, Chinese non-NGOs have introduced initiatives such as Talent Among Friendship workshops, which provide training and help their employment locally. Today, in China's NGO Network for International Exchange is convening the second International Civil Society Solidarity Conference on the Global Development Initiative in Inner Mongolia. Civil society representatives from China and abroad are sharing examples and heartfelt stories of how their commitments to gender equality have been translated into concrete actions. We call on all countries to foster peaceful, inclusive society for women and to promote equality for all. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Make Mothers Matter.
Mothers Matter welcome the report of the Special Rapporteur, which widely highlights the link between gender equality and the right to development. We particularly value his recognition of the care economy. Across the world, mothers and other caregivers sustain family and societies through their unpaid domestic and care work. Yet, this essential contribution remains invisible in economic models and undervalued in policy frameworks. When care is not recognized or fairly shared, women, especially mothers, face persistent inequalities in education, employment, political participation, and cultural life, limiting both their right to development and that of society as a whole. Intersectionality matters. Rural, migrant, and low-income women are hardest hit. The report calls for a feminist economy, one that invests in care infrastructures, values unpaid care, and ensures its fair sharing between women and men, families and society, public and private actors. We therefore urge states to invest in cross-sectorial care systems, from quality, accessible childcare and parental leaves to universal health care and social protection. Place care at the center of national and international development strategies. It is time to repurpose our economic system to prioritize the well-being of people and the planet at the heart of the right to development, and to recognize and support unpaid care work. Recognizing and valuing care is not only a question of gender justice, it is key for the realization of the right to development for all.
I give the floor to deliver a joint statement by International Planned Parenthood Federation.
Thank you. This is a joint statement. We welcome the report's assertion that there can be no gender equality, including sexual and reproductive health and rights, without the right to development, and that intersectional discrimination, includes based on gender, race, class, sexual orientation, gender identity, remain obstacles to achieving equality and therefore development. Although the report points out discrimination based on socioeconomic status, it is necessary that states directly address discrimination against people engaged in sex work. We stress that consensual adult sex work is work. To realize the right to development, states should fully decriminalize sex work, recognize labor rights, and ensure active, free, and meaningful participation in decision-making. States should not be forced to choose between repaying unsustainable debt burdens and fulfilling human rights, including SRHR. Global financial institutions must consider the gender impacts of debt and austerity. Debt relief and cancellation are urgently needed. We echo the call for a shift towards a feminist economy that prioritizes public, rights-based investment in care infrastructure. Care is a universal need, a right, and a job performed mainly by women and racialized people, which should be recognized and retributed. At its core, the right to development must challenge the dominant economic paradigm by reconceptualizing growth while focusing on redistribution of all resources. We call on all states to address the precarious natures of gender labor by including the redefinition, redistribution, and revalidation of labor, including unpaid care work and sex work. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Sikh Human Rights Group.
Thank you, Vice President. We thank the Special Rapporteur for its thought-provoking and precise report. We would like to emphasize that the right to development can only be realized with appropriate integration of gender input, and gender dignity is reinforced by the realization of the right to development. In this sense, women's participation in decision-making, so deeply rooted in the Sikh tradition that promotes dignity, respect, and inclusion of all identities, ensures that policies are inclusive and responsive. Furthermore, let us remember that women's health, especially menstrual and reproductive health, is still stigmatized and underfunded. On top of this, the famous pink tax is still present in many countries, undermining dignity and obstructing development. We are pleased to read the Special Rapporteur's report mention of the fair distribution of unpaid domestic tasks, which are disproportionately performed by women, with all the negative consequences that this entails. Finally, we would like to recall the essential role that women from indigenous and rural communities play as guardians of biodiversity and sustainable practices, yet they are often excluded from the decision-making process. We suggest that the numerous women's cooperatives be better supported under the framework of the right to development. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Center for International Environmental Law.
Thank you. CL and Nurse Justice would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for addressing the issue of Investor-State Dispute Settlement, or ISDS, in his report on Honduras. He describes how the case of Prosper is emblematic of the way in which ISDS forces governments to pay polluters and threatens the state's ability to protect the environment, indigenous lands, and human rights. By allowing foreign investors to sue states for adopting measures in the public interest, ISDS forces governments to pay polluters instead of holding them accountable, a direct violation of international human rights and environmental law. The threats of multi-billion-dollar claims deter governments from adopting stronger human rights and climate measures. Such investment claims can produce regulatory chill, discouraging states from phasing out fossil fuels. Far from facilitating a just transition, ISDS entrenches the fossil fuel economy and deepens states' dependency on extractive industries. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights has likewise affirmed that investment treaties and ISDS must not restrict states from adopting measures to confront the climate crisis and fulfill their human rights obligations. We therefore urge the Human Rights Council to take up this matter explicitly to ensure that ISDS no longer undermines states' ability to meet their human rights and climate commitments. Thank you.
Thank you. This was the last speaker we could accommodate for this debate. I now give the floor to Mr. Surya Deva for his concluding remarks. You have the floor, Mr. Deva.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. And thank you also to all the delegations for raising several questions, but also I gather from the interventions on Wednesday afternoon as well as this morning, because yesterday there was a holiday, that there is almost universal appreciation of the nexus that I've tried to build in the report between gender equality and the right to development. So this is the value addition that I'm trying to bring. So instead of looking at gender equality and the right to development as two parallel compartments, I'm trying to suggest that all the actors, including states, businesses, UN agencies, and development actors, must see gender equality as a cross-cutting foundational issue, and whatever else is being done is adopted from that particular lens. Let me try to address some specific questions. There was a question about how international cooperation could be strengthened to promote gender equality. That was a question from Djibouti as well as Vietnam. And I will suggest that we should see international cooperation in a wide sense. It's not merely about development aid, but it's also about technical assistance. It's also capacity building, and so sharing good practices. And in all these processes, it is crucial that we take into account the perspective of girls and women. And I think that will be a key way going forward. The world faces a lot of challenges, and one way to overcome these challenges, whether these are conflicts, because conflicts impact women and girls disproportionately, or climate change crisis, all these challenges require international cooperation. It is difficult, but there is no alternative to international cooperation. And the ICJ, in its advisory opinion, has reiterated and confirmed that international cooperation is an obligation of all states under customary international law. So, and that is also a key component of right to development. There was a question from Luxembourg about how could we ensure intersectional participation of women in international cooperation, but as well as development aid. And here I would like to suggest that listening to diverse girls and women in countries where the development aid is supposed to make a difference is very crucial. Gender equality is non-negotiable, cross-cutting and foundational issue, but there are different views in different countries. So instead of imposing a particular narrative around gender equality, it is crucial to listen to the women rather than deciding for them. Listen to the girls, listen to women in those countries where the development aid is going to make a difference, and integrate those perspectives rather than thinking, okay, I have this perspective and that should be followed globally. I think diversity is a value that can be used in a positive manner, in my view. Let me also briefly address the concern raised by Holisi about the abortion and a potential conflict between right to life. I would like to underline that abortion is about autonomy of women. This should be respected, and many countries accept it in certain situations. It also becomes a necessity of the life of that woman itself we're talking about. So from my perspective, I don't see any conflict between abortion and right to life, because there is that crucial issue about the agency of women that has to be respected. Pakistan asked a question about climate resilience and how gender perspective, women perspective could be integrated. First of all, women bring a lot of unique knowledge about resilience. And often we do not see them having that knowledge. So women should not be seen as someone who are there and we have to help them, we have to rescue them. In resilience efforts, policies, and strategies, we should listen to women and their experiences and their knowledge and build it from there, bottom up, and use that knowledge to build local strategies which are going to mitigate the challenges about the climate disasters that we are witnessing with a flood. For instance, women take care of plants at house. So how could plantation is going to be used as a shield against climate change related disasters and all that? Portugal asked question about gender and budgeting, and I would like to draw the attention to paragraph 40, specifically where I mentioned some good practices about gender responsive budgeting. In my view, gender has to be integrated in all policy making, including budgeting, public procurement, taxation, and everywhere. And I think that is, we already see some good practices, and I think we need to scale it up. Finally, let me just address British Humanist Association question about religion and culture. As I indicated in my report, we should use culture and religion in a positive way to promote gender equality. We should also look at how those practices developed historically and keep that in mind. So let me conclude by saying that I very much appreciate the delegations and civil society and actors taking the floor. The list was quite long, 70 plus states, and I offer the opportunity for delegations to engage bilaterally if you would like to, or share your statements and we can continue. And please join the conversation at 2 p.m. at a side event that my mandate is co-organizing with India, and that side event is co-sponsored by Mexico, Kenya, Thailand, and Spain. So it's a cross-regional group. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. I wish to thank Mr. Deva. I understand his name means sun god, for his participation. We will take a short break before the holding of the interactive dialogue with the expert mechanisms on the right to development. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, we will now begin the interactive dialogue with expert mechanism on right to development. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. I will now give the floor to the chair of the expert mechanism, Mr. Boni Ibawo, to present the report. Over to you.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I have the honor to present our annual report on 2 thematic studies in my capacity as the chair of the expert mechanism on the right to development. Since our last report to this council, the expert mechanism has held 2 sessions actively involving member states, civil society, experts, and practitioners. We have also engaged with international negotiations to promote full consideration of the right to development and continued to closely coordinate with the chair of the Intergovernmental Working Group on the Right to Development and the Special Rapporteur, amongst others. During our 10th session in Geneva last year, the expert mechanism undertook meaningful exchanges about ways in which the right to development could be featured in ongoing international discussions, agreements, and instruments. We discussed 2 draft studies and held 6 interactive thematic dialogues aimed at drawing upon experiences, good practices, and strategies to address pressing global challenges. At our 11th session in New York earlier this year, we explored how member states and other stakeholders could face the new global context at multilateral and national levels, looking ahead to the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. We discussed 2 draft studies and held 3 in-focus discussions. As a result, we issued a package of recommendations for mainstreaming the right to development in the outcome document of the Financing for Development 4th Conference. These documents are available on our website. Madam Chair, I'm pleased to further present today 2 thematic studies: Operationalizing the Right to Development in International Development Cooperation, led by my fellow expert, Meha Kanade, and Climate Justice, Sustainability and the Right to Development, which I led myself. They're contained in documents A, HRC 6094, and A, HRC 6095, respectively. The first study explores the cross-cutting normative principles of the right to development that can be mainstreamed across cooperation practices. It focuses on bilateral and triangular cooperation, providing lessons that can apply to other practices, including development banks, financial institutions, and trade organizations. The study underscores the importance of international cooperation in realizing human rights and sustainable development against a context where the 2030 agenda is derailed, progress on poverty and hunger has stalled or even reversed, and many developing countries face a monumental financing gap, being either in or at risk of debt distress. Global partnership and enhanced cooperation are critical, especially for least developed countries and other low-income countries. But when cooperation is ineffective, it can be harmful to the right to development of individuals and peoples. In most cases, conditionalities undermine the recipient's development priorities and goals, as well as its welfare policies, and certain trade and investment agreements can limit the governance and policy space of states. The study analyzes the principles of effective North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation, identifying good practices in each context. It further shows that operationalizing the right to development at all stages of development cooperation can help to ensure effectiveness, making it possible to make a conscious effort to humanize cooperation. Some of the normative principles of the right to development that the study elaborates are: development is an inalienable right of all individuals and people, it's not a privilege. The right holders should be able to self-determine their priorities. The process by which outcomes are achieved are as important as the outcomes. Receiving states have a duty to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to development. States must not obstruct others' right to development, including uncooperative practices and unilateral coercive measures. States able to assist should do so in line with their extraterritorial obligations to realize the right to development. Cooperation is a duty, not charity. Impact assessments are essential. Mutual accountability is crucial, including transparency, public availability of information, and remedies. The second study, titled Climate Justice, Sustainability, and the Right to Development, examines how the right to development can be effectively incorporated into established and emerging climate practices and policies. It reconciles environmental sustainability and development aspirations. Climate justice is presented not only as a guidance framework, but as a central objective for meaningful and effective climate action. The study sets out how each core principle of the right to development, such as equality, meaningful participation, self-determination, and international cooperation, can be applied in the context of climate action to enable more equitable outcomes, strengthen legitimacy, and address accountability gaps. The study offers a normative framework and a set of practical strategies to advance climate justice, highlighting promising practices. It offers concrete recommendations to address critical gaps in climate governance and finance, including the establishment of a climate finance hubs to enhance coordination and provide technical assistance, the creation of a dedicated climate justice fund, and the appointment of climate justice ombudspersons at both national and international levels, a reform of global intellectual property rights regimes, which currently restrict equitable and timely access to vital technologies for climate mitigation and adaptation, and finally, broader structural reforms of the global financial system, international trade policies, and transfer of technology. Climate action must respond to lived realities, priorities, and aspirations of those most affected by the climate crisis. The expert mechanism calls for aligning climate strategies with right to development principles to enhance legitimacy, bridge accountability gaps, and deliver more equitable and impactful solutions. We trust that the two studies will serve as valuable contributions to the deliberations of the Human Rights Council and offer practical guidance in advancing the right to development. Madam Chair, the ongoing liquidity constraints continue to affect the work of the expert mechanism. But despite these challenges, we strive to continue engaging with supporting member states, civil society, and other stakeholders through various platforms and avenues. Looking ahead, we are preparing for our 12th session taking place from the 27th to 29th October 2025, and we will warmly welcome your participation. At this opportunity, I look forward to our interactive dialogue and to receiving your suggestions for the effective implementation of the mandate of our mechanisms. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions and to make comments on the reports. The speaking time is 1 minute and 30 seconds for all. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of European Union.
Thank you. Dear, thanks the expert mechanism for the presentation. We continue to emphasize that inclusive and sustainable development can only be achieved through the full realization of all human rights, for which each state has the obligation and primary responsibility. It is essential that the right to development is rooted in universality, indivisibility, interrelation, and interdependence of all human rights. Full and effective implementation of existing international human rights obligations is a key to sustainable development. We consider that existing human rights treaties, mechanisms, and bodies with the centrality of the 2030 Agenda are key in guiding states. The EU is a strong and reliable partner and continues to work together towards those objectives. Using a human rights-based approach to build the human rights economy ensures that the furthest left behind are reached first. The EU reiterates its strong concerns and pending questions on the current draft of a legally binding instrument on the right to development, leading to diverging views. We stand ready to continue engaging in future discussions. As we pursue a just and fair climate transition, we remain the world's largest contributor to international public climate finance. Since 2013, we have more than doubled the contribution to climate finance to support developing countries, with a strong commitment to continue delivering on climate finance in the future. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ghana on behalf of the Group of African States.
The African Group appreciates the expert mechanism in providing expertise and guidance on global implementation of the right to development and reiterates its full support for its work. We reaffirm our commitment to the Declaration on the Right to Development, which recognizes development as an inalienable human right rooted in dignity, justice, and self-determination, and achievable only through strengthened international cooperation and solidarity. In line with the African Union's 2025 theme, we emphasize the urgent need to reform the global financial system to a fair and equitable international financial architecture that prioritizes the promotion and protection of human rights for African peoples, fosters sustainable development, eradicates poverty, and upholds human dignity. The African Union's dedication of the year 2025 to reparations and structural justice underscores that addressing historical inequities is not only a moral imperative, but also a prerequisite for equitable realization of the right to development. This can only be achieved through debt relief, debt restructuring, fair and responsible financing practices, transparency, accountability, and good governance. Finally, the group calls for the adoption of the International Covenant on the Right to Development, emphasizing that further delay undermines the urgent need to address global inequalities. A timely adoption accelerates the realization of the right to development for all. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria on behalf of Group of Arab States.
Shukran. Thank you, Madam Chair. It is my honor to address you on behalf of the Arab Group and to thank the expert mechanism for its yearly report and thematic reports on the right to development. And we reiterate in this context our support to the right to development because it's a universal human rights. And we support the drafting of an internationally legally binding instrument on the right to development. This should be done according to the priorities of the countries and to take into account climate financing, climate change, transfer of technology, and according to the principles of CBDR. We also support the full participation and effective participation of women in the implementation of the right to development. We reiterate that the international community should shoulder its responsibility to stop the genocide by the occupying power against the Palestinian people that is under blockade in Gaza and to end the occupation that destroyed all the components of development in Palestine. We also call to enhance financing for development by restructuring the international financial structure, find solution to the high indebtedness, and to also support countries in restoring their stolen assets. Thank you.
Thank you. The list of speakers is now closed. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jamaica on behalf of Caribbean community.
The CARICOM Group welcomes the report of the thematic study on climate justice, sustainability, and the right to development. We underscore that the expert mechanism has a critical role in fostering greater understanding, inclusivity, accountability, and the delivery of fair, equitable, and sustainable climate action to promote climate justice. As SIDS, the CARICOM region continuously grapples with the deleterious effects of climate change, including rising sea levels and extreme weather events. These effects negatively impact our enjoyment of the right to development, as hard-won development gains are frequently reversed, despite current resilience-building measures. Climate justice therefore requires the following: embedding the principles of the right to development in existing and new initiatives that ensure equity and inclusivity when tackling the climate crisis, effectively contributing to broader frameworks and processes such as the Loss and Damage Fund, COP outcomes, and the attainment of the SDGs, and addressing the double inequality of the climate debt through reform of funding initiatives that require the most vulnerable developing countries to contribute significant financial resources disproportionate to their role in creating the climate crisis. The principles of the right to development must reinforce the commitment of member states to enact climate justice and achieve a just transition, particularly for climate vulnerable nations. The CARICOM group calls on the expert mechanism to facilitate the required actions to ensure that in enacting climate justice, those least responsible do not suffer the most. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of a group of countries.
Gracias, Vicepresidenta.
Thank you, Vice President. Venezuela has the honor to take the floor on behalf of the Group of Friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. The Group of Friends attaches great importance to the promotion and protection of all human rights without distinction in terms of level or category. In that context, the right to development, which we believe to be a universal, inalienable human right, is one of the rights of the peoples, and its implementation and enjoyment is of the most urgent, particularly in as much as economic and social inequalities, which have been sustained and historic among the countries of the global north and those of the south, continue to increase. This situation emphasizes the relevance of reaffirming the right to development enshrined in the UN Charter and as a right which must be guaranteed by all states and fully recognized by international human rights law. We observe with concern that full implementation of the right to development continues to be blocked inter alia by the application of unilateral coercive measures, which are an obstacle to the implementation of the 2030 agenda. Strongly committed to our mission, our shared mission of ensuring that development is fully recognized as a universal and inalienable human right for all, the Group of Friends emphasizes its determination to support as a priority, as an urgent matter, all of the efforts geared to that end. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of Movement of Non-Aligned Countries, NAM.
Thank you, Vice President. I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the NAM. At the outset, the NAM would like to express its sincere appreciation to the expert mechanism for their work, and we reiterate our support to them, particularly on the work and activities to be carried out in the fulfillment of their mandate. The NAM also believes that the right to development should be central to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in this vein, we urge all member states to pay a particular attention to the right to development in the context of the elaboration of their national policies in line with the 2030 Agenda. Vice President, NAM further calls upon the United Nations, its specialized agencies, funds, and programs to mainstream the right to development in their policies and operational activities, as well as in policies and strategies of the international financial and multilateral trading system. We express our deep concern about the challenges and obstacles that continue to affect the mechanism on the right to development, and they continue to face, and remind all states that we all have the duty to take steps to facilitate the full realization of the right to development, including supporting the work of the expert mechanism. Finally, Vice President, we reassure the expert mechanism of NAM's continued unwavering support in the execution of your mandate. You can count on us. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Madam Vice President, Indian delegation has taken note of the report presented by the expert mechanism. We reiterate our steadfast support for the full and effective implementation of the right to development. We also urge the Office of the High Commissioner to extend all possible support and resources to the expert mechanism to ensure that it can effectively carry out its important mandate. Madam Vice President, we also take note of the thematic studies on operationalizing the right to development in international development cooperation and climate justice, sustainability, and the right to development. India has always viewed humanity as one family and stressed the significance of South-South as well as North-South cooperation. Guided by the need to strengthen development cooperation and to support developing countries in achieving the SDGs, India has expanded its development partnerships with developing countries, including LDCs and small island developing states. Our cooperation has always been guided by our partners' development priorities. Contributing to global climate action and addressing the challenges of global warming, India has taken initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Madam Vice President, India remains committed to the operationalization of the right to development and will continue to engage constructively with the international community towards the conclusion of the International Covenant. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nigeria.
Madam Vice President, Nigeria aligns with the statement by the African Group and NAM. We welcome the report of the expert mechanism and I appreciate its role in advancing the operationalization of the right to development. My delegation remains deeply concerned that the current international financial system does not adequately serve the needs of the Global South. Nigeria therefore calls for urgent reform of the global financial and development cooperation architecture to one that is fair, equitable, and with strong focus on debt relief, transparency, accountability, and good governance. We stress that international cooperation is a duty of states, not charity. Therefore, genuine cooperation must respect the national development priorities of recipient states and must not compel them to compromise their sovereignty in exchange for assistance. As an active member of the South-South Cooperation, Nigeria recognizes the importance of solidarity-based partnership founded on equity, equality, non-conditionality, and mutual benefits. Though such cooperation, Nigeria gains access to knowledge, technology, and expertise while strengthening national capacities, self-reliance, and regional partnership. Moving forward, Nigeria urges that the right to development be fully operationalized across all forms of cooperation so that development is recognized and implemented as both human right and collective responsibility. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda.
Madam President. Uganda aligns with the statements of the NAM. We extend our appreciation to the expert mechanism and support the mandate for their work. The right to development is a fundamental human right and is an integral pillar to the enjoyment of all other rights. The achievement of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals will only be possible with realization of the right to development. Issues of poverty, underdevelopment, marginalization, and political instability cannot be divorced from meaningful discussion relating to human rights. And on this premise, we invite all states to finalize the covenant on the right to development that will pave a legal path and responsibilities for states to collectively and individually ensure promotion and protection of the right to development. Finally, Uganda reassures the expert mechanism of our support and reiterate our commitment in the promotion of the right to development for our people. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا السيدة نائبة.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My country's delegation would like to welcome the members of the expert mechanism on the right to development and would like to thank them for the report, and we support their mandate. We also express our strong support to the right to development because it's a fundamental and universal human right that should be ensured to all individuals and peoples, and we call for accelerating and expediting efforts to adopting an international covenant in this context. We also give a great priority to the right to development, and we continue working on implementing SDG 2030. We have secured the social and economic rights through our National Development Plan for 2023-2025 and Tunisia Vision 2035. We call to promoting international cooperation and solidarity in the development field by increasing ODAs, building capacities, facilitating transfer of technology to developing countries so that they can achieve sustainable progress and promote their infrastructure. We also call for reforming the international financial architecture and to find a solution to the debt that is imposed on the developing countries. We also highlight the importance of full cooperation with the countries that received stolen assets so that these assets can be returned to the countries of origin. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the presentation of the thematic reports by the expert mechanism. Venezuela attaches great importance to development for cooperation for development, voluntary development, and cooperation in order to address shared problems. We support initiatives within our country, such as Eco Caribe, which seeks to strengthen the country's socioeconomic development and that of the Caribbean and Latin America. We are concerned at the pressure by the US government on our country with the illegal application of unilateral coercive measures and campaigns to discredit our legitimate institutions. This has reached unprecedented levels of threat, including the threats of the use of military force in the Caribbean. Unilateral coercive measures violate international law and harm the right to development. They exacerbate inequalities and marginalize vulnerable groups. We respectfully call on the experts to reject the use and the threat of use of force against independent countries, which threatens the full enjoyment of human rights and in particular the right to development of our peoples. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of UNDP.
Excellencies, UNDP welcomes the study of the expert mechanism, and we share the commitment to advance right-based development and climate justice. Firstly, UNDP welcomes the report's recommendation for rights-based climate policy and NDCs. As the largest provider of assistance on climate action in the UN, UNDP supports more than 140 countries. UNDP also leads the collaborative effort of 30 UN entities to support the development of the latest round of national pledges under the Paris Agreement. Such efforts are delivered through gender-responsive and socially inclusive climate action encompassing women, youth, indigenous peoples, and persons with disabilities. Secondly, UNDP echoes the recommendation for the participation of marginalized populations in climate action and governance. Across UNDP's climate change and disaster risk reduction programming, we prioritize community-led solutions, including crisis response, advancing the just transition, and solutions to loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. Thirdly, UNDP is actively working to advance the call in the report for equipping legal institutions to deal with climate injustice. UNDP is supporting judges to enhance their climate expertise to decide cases in Georgia, Malawi, Kyrgyzstan, and across the Western Balkans.
Thank you.
Excellencies, UNDP is committed to supporting countries in delivering rights-based development solutions and climate actions, and we look forward to continue working closely with all
Thank you.
partners.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vanuatu.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Madam Vice President, Vanuatu is honored to speak on the right to development, which for us is inseparable from climate justice and sustainability. As a small island developing state, our survival and our right to develop are under direct threat from rising seas, stronger storms, and biodiversity loss. The recent ICJ advisory opinion on 23 July 2025, initiated by Vanuatu, is a milestone for climate justice. The court confirmed that states have binding obligations under international law to prevent significant environmental harm, to act urgently in line with science, and to protect the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Crucially, the ICJ recognized the inadequate action, climate action, may amount to an intentionally wrongful act, and the obligation are owed to all humanity. This clarifies that vulnerable nations have long known climate inaction undermines the right to development, especially for those who have contributed least to the crisis. Mr. Vice President, the right to development must therefore be realized through equitable climate finance, technology transfer and capacity building, sustainable models that safeguard future generations, and accountability for both states and private actors, including major emitters. Vanuatu urges this Council to anchor its works in the principle affirmed by the ICJ that climate justice is not optional, but a legal and moral duty. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Benin. Looks like Benin is absent. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Ethiopia aligns itself with the African Group in NAM statements, and we thank the expert mechanism for the comprehensive report and expresses full support for your work. We also strongly align with the call for a shift from development as charity to development as a human right and legal obligation of states. For Ethiopia, the right to development is a lived reality. Development cooperation must be grounded in equity, justice, solidarity, and country ownership, not donor-driven priorities. Ethiopia recognizes the right to development in both its constitution and its international obligations. Our 10-year development plan, aligned with the SDGs and the homegrown economic reform agenda, promotes inclusive growth, private sector development, and climate resilience. Initiatives like the Green Legacy demonstrates our commitment to sustainable development. Despite the global reaffirmation, implementation remains limited. Inequalities, unilateral coercive measures, and global crises continue to undermine progress. We call for the international cooperation that respects national priorities, mobilizes united financial resources, and supports South-South cooperation. In conclusion, Ethiopia supports development and the adoption of a legally binding instrument to fully operationalize the right to development and ensure fair, inclusive, and accountable global progress. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
Shukran. Thank you, Madam Vice President. We have carefully reviewed the report on climate justice, sustainability, and the right to development. We share the view of the mechanism that there is as yet no universally agreed definition of climate justice within multilateral frameworks. Nevertheless, the concept is reflected in a number of widely recognized principles and notions, including the principle of equality, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, the concept of the historical responsibility, the climate finance obligations, and the notion of just transitions. This enhances justice and equity. In addressing sustainability and the right to development within the context of climate change, it is essential to take into account the developmental priorities and the diverse national circumstances of states, as well as the right of developing countries to pursue their full developmental potential in line with the experience of developed countries. In this regard, we support the recommendation of the expert mechanism urging states to prioritize just transition policies so as to ensure that those affected by the gradual shift away from fossil fuels are not left behind. For many developing countries, natural resources represent an existential matter. Their extraction and utilization are not a luxury, but rather the primary means by which states lift themselves out of poverty, guarantee the fundamental rights of their citizens, and build resilient societies capable of withstanding crises in a sustainable manner. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Madam Vice President, the Islamic Republic of Iran welcomes the report of expert mechanism on the right to development, which highlights the importance of international cooperation, including both North-South and South-South partnership as essential for the full realization of the right to development. The report also identifies key challenges, including financial and structural obstacles that hinder countries from achieving sustainable progress and equitable development. In this context, we emphasize that strengthening cooperation, solidarity, and respect for national priority are crucial. We call upon states and international community to support initiatives that empower developing countries and foster an inclusive and just international development framework. In light of these findings, could the expert mechanism elaborate on concrete measures that the state and international actors can take to overcome financial and structural obstacles and ensure effective implementation of the right to development? Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zambia.
Madam Vice President, Zambia welcomes the report of the expert mechanism and reaffirms that the right to development is fundamental in achieving the SDGs. Addressing debt sustainability, climate finance, and inclusive growth is critical for our shared prosperity. Gender equality and the right to development are mutually reinforcing. We support the call for stronger participation, equitable resource sharing, and intersectional approaches. For Zambia, ensuring that women's voices are central to policy, from communities to national strategies, is essential. Empowering women and girls not only drives development, but also builds inclusive and resilient societies. For Zambia, the link between climate justice, sustainability, and the right to development is a lived reality. Our people face recurring floods, droughts, and changing rainfall patterns that threaten food security and development gains. With disproportionate impact on women and girls, yet we see opportunity to build a path that is resilient, inclusive, and fair. We welcome the call to operationalize the right to development, especially in climate policy. As a climate vulnerable country, Zambia stresses that adaptation, finance, and decision-making must integrate gender equality at every step. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Marshall Islands.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Republic of the Marshall Islands thanks the expert mechanism for its study and its emphasis on aligning climate justice with the right to development. Climate injustice is not a distant problem. It is a lived reality for our people. As a small island developing state, we are responsible for a tiny proportion of global emissions. Yet, rising sea levels, displacement, and extreme weather events already threaten our communities, our way of life, and our fundamental human rights to life, health, and culture. We welcome the reminder that all states should be incorporating climate justice into their development plans and strategies at the national level. Indeed, we established the Tile Committee to implement our 2050 climate strategy, our low-emission, climate-resilient development strategy under the Paris Agreement. But we cannot do this alone. Climate justice and the right to development must be central to all climate action initiatives. We support the integration of right to development principles into climate policies, ensuring a fair and equitable future that leaves no vulnerable nations or community behind. And I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Sultanate of Oman appreciates the work of the expert mechanism and stresses that the right to development is a principal human rights. Hence, there is need for international cooperation for fairness, equity, and hence, any cooperation has to be based on equal partnership while respecting the right of peoples to define their own developmental paths in according to their national priorities and needs. Enhancing cooperation between the North and the South and South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation are an effective model to exchange expertise, the transfer of technology, and building capacities to achieve development, transparency in the development of cooperation and partnership while adhering to human rights and avoiding any transparency or any discrimination or exclusion are essential. We are after a fair and equitable partnership that achieves the right to development and serves all the rights of peoples without any discrimination whatsoever. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Gracias, señor. Thank you, Madam Vice President. We're grateful for the work of the expert mechanism and the presentation of the report that reaffirms the core role of the right to development as an indivisible and interdependent human right. This right cannot continue to be relegated. It needs to occupy a priority role in international agendas. It needs to be understood as an integral process that guarantees the welfare of people, equal access to resources, and fair participation of all states in global decisions. There can be no development without social justice, economic sovereignty, and respect for economic growth models. Economic blockades, such as that of the US against Cuba, UCMs, inequality of access to finance, and the non-fulfillment of commitments for official development assistance, external debt, the violation of the principles and rules of international trade, and other factors are direct violations of the right to development. It is pressing that the international community acts with responsibility and coherence to eradicate these barriers. International cooperation needs to be based on mutual respect and strengthening national capacities. It is not possible to condition this with political or economic interests this does not contribute to sustainable development, access to technology, and bolstering national capacity. The right to development can be achieved if we eradicate any form of foreign interference and ensure that there is a fairer, more inclusive order that is focused on the interests of our people. Thank you.
To the distinguished representative of Colombia.
Gracias, señora. Thank you, Madam Vice President. We'd like to thank the expert mechanism for the presentation of the report, and we take this dialogue as an opportunity to highlight the importance of the right to development and shared responsibility of states in creating conditions that allow for its realization. This right is a pillar for building fairer, more inclusive societies, whilst we keep respect for civil and political rights. Colombia, since 1986, has supported the Declaration on the Right to Development and other General Assembly resolutions in this field. We would highlight the focus on the report on business and human rights and the process to create a binding instrument on business and international enterprises and the respect for human rights. And this needs to play a key role in assessing the impact of these businesses. We would like to ask the mechanism, what do you consider particularly relevant to ensure that this instrument can bolster business practices and align them with sustainable development and ensure that we have a global environment that respects all human rights? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Madam Vice President, Bangladesh welcomes the annual report and thematic studies of the expert mechanism. We reiterate that the right to development is a fundamental right. It is central to the realization of all human rights and indispensable for the attainment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The progress towards SDGs is off track. Half of the targets are failing. Poverty and hunger are on the rise, and developing countries face a yearly financing gap over $4 trillion. Moreover, more than half of the low-income states are in debt distress. At the same time, climate change constitutes an existential threat that further exacerbates the global disparities. These realities expose systematic shortcomings in global partnership and underscores the need for revitalizing multilateralism. Madam Vice President, we reaffirm the urgent need for reform of the international financial architecture to address the financing gaps for development, debt burden, and other emerging and complex development challenges. International cooperation must be effective, people-centered, and inclusive, free from conditionalities, to ensure meaningful participation for all, particularly those in vulnerable and marginalized situations. Bangladesh attaches high importance to the early conclusion of a legally binding instrument on the right to development and remains committed to engaging constructively with the international community to that end. Madam Vice President, Bangladesh urges all states
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Gambia.
Good morning, Madam Vice President. We thank the Chair, Rapporteur, and the members of the expert mechanism for their timely report that rightly underscores inclusive participation, climate justice, and financing reform as pillars for realizing the right to development. For the Gambia, the right to development is not aspirational but actionable. Our recovery-focused National Development Plan and the emerging Vision 2050 climate strategy are aligned with the African Union Agenda 2063 and the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. At the social level, the Gambia is among the first African countries to establish a comprehensive census-based social registry, now covering the vast majority of households nationwide. This enables us to target the most vulnerable families with precision and transparency, ensuring that social protection programs reach those most in need. We echo the expert mechanism's call for reforms to the international financial architecture, which aligns with the African position that reforms to the international financial architecture must deliver fairer outcomes for developing countries. For the Gambia, this means debt relief that creates fiscal space for investment in people, climate finance that is predictable and accessible for adaptation and resilience, and technology transfer that bridges the digital divide. These are obligations of solidarity and justice, essential to realizing the right to development. And I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malawi.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Malawi aligns itself with the statement of the African Group and welcomes the annual report of the expert mechanism on the right to development. Malawi commends the role it has played in providing the Council with specialized knowledge and expertise on the right to development, as well as identifying and sharing best practices and promoting global implementation of the right. We note with concern that during the reporting period, the liquidity situation in relation to the United Nations regular budget affected the ability of the expert mechanism to fully deliver its mandate. Madam Vice President, the right to development is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of Malawi. And in that regard, Malawi is implementing the Malawi Agenda 2063, which is the overall national blueprint aimed at transforming Malawi into a self-reliant and industrialized upper-middle country by 2063. Malawi reaffirms its unwavering support to the right to development as a universal human right, central to the 2030 Agenda and reducing global inequalities. We emphasize the urgency and reaffirming the right to development amid global crises and advocate for international solidarity, structural reforms, fair systems, people-centered approaches, inclusive cooperation, and a policy space for developing countries. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Russian Federation.
Madam Vice President, we thank the expert mechanism for presenting its report. We note the scale of the work done and its ambitious nature. Russia supports this activity. We are convinced that the expert mechanism's efforts and findings will be useful and necessary for practical implementation of the right to development. The right to development is universal and inalienable. Its full implementation will facilitate enjoyment of all human rights and prosperity for countries and peoples, overcoming economic and social inequalities inside countries and among them. We believe that one of the main hindrances for full enjoyment of the right to development is the introduction by a number of states of unilateral coercive measures against certain inconvenient governments. We resolutely condemn this misguided practice and find these unlawful restrictions to be an instrument to punish sovereign states for independent internal and foreign policy and a mechanism for strategic systemic pressure on them to reduce their economic and technological capacities. We see this as an exacerbation of the global battle to compete, which is becoming increasingly sophisticated and intransigent. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal.
Madam Vice President,
Nepal thanks the expert mechanism for presenting the annual report in line with further advancing the right to development. Right to development is an inherent human right in both its individual and collective forms. It covers a wide range of human rights, including the economic, social, cultural, as well as environmental rights. Ongoing conflicts, trade tensions, coupled with the impacts of climate change and global resource constraints have jeopardized the realization of Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, by 2030. As financing for development remains as the major challenge in operationalizing the right to development, Nepal calls upon all stakeholders to act towards strengthening development cooperation and enhancing access to finance in true spirit of partnership and solidarity. Madam Vice President, in closing, we would like to request the distinguished experts to suggest innovative ways to support the least developed countries' LDCs to optimize the allocation of necessary resources in order to effectively realize the right to development. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of plurinational state of Bolivia.
Gracias, Vicepresidente.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We're grateful to the presentation, to the experts for the presentation, and we believe that to correct historic injustice and disparities, we need to see climate finance being distributed to taking into account shared but differentiated responsibilities. In relation to the report on the right to development and international cooperation for development, the expert mechanism clearly identified the challenges and best practices for North, South, 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 and triangular cooperation. It highlighted that incorporating the right to development can contribute to better efficiency and legitimacy of our collective action. To improve efficiency, we need to adopt a human rights-based approach and consider the right to development not just as a goal, but as a universal right, and cooperation as an obligation incumbent upon states to ensure that this is effective. Looking at the Addis Ababa guidelines and celebrating 80 years since the UN Charter, we would reaffirm a call to strengthen international cooperation to ensure we tackle international challenges that may be social, cultural, humanitarian, including the right to development. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
شكرا سيدة نائبة الرئيس. يأخذ وفد بلادي علما.
The delegation of my country has read the report and looked at the themes presented by the expert mechanism on the right to development. This is an universal, inalienable right that highlights the right to development, and this requires international cooperation, but that it's not just about assistance. It's also part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. However, we are concerned at the shortcomings and the gaps that hamper the exercise of the right to development. We would call on developing states to be able to recover, and we call on cooperation between South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation and North-South cooperation to try to recover this development. We have provided $1 billion to support development projects in Africa. We've also organized the 4th exhibition on collaboration across African states. To conclude, our country stands ready to collaborate with all member states to bolster international cooperation to ensure that this be a driver for international cooperation and development and for human dignity. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Burkina Faso.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of Burkina Faso commends the expert mechanism on the right to development for its high-quality report. We reaffirm our commitment to the right to development as a universal human right. My country calls on the expert mechanism to tackle UCMs through a development lens, whilst adopting a human rights-based approach, international cooperation, and allowing room for maneuver for developing countries. Looking at violations of human rights and the right to development in particular, my country would call on support for PMEs and drafting of national action plans to try to combat corruption and give access to people to obtain justice, including perhaps extraterritorial mechanisms. Furthermore, at governmental level, we have seen the transformational effect of artificial intelligence when it comes to creativity, and my country would draw attention to risks in connection with this and the creation of inequalities globally. Burkina Faso calls for a fairer world, an inclusive dialogue that respects our inherent rights in states and favors the right to development. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Brazil thanks the mechanism for the presentation. We reaffirm our commitment to the right to development, essential for reducing domestic and global inequalities. For Brazil, international cooperation and the recognition of development as an individual and collective right must underpin relations amongst nations. Brazil strongly supports international cooperation. We call on the international community to provide sufficient financing, effective technology transfer, and robust capacity building as essential elements of development cooperation. We are pleased to note the initiatives involving Brazil in the mechanism report on cooperation. These partnerships underscore our commitment to development as a responsibility grounded in human rights and consistently aligned with national priorities. With regard to climate justice, it constitutes the foundation of an effective global response to climate change, with particular attention to the human rights of vulnerable communities. Developed countries must assume their historical responsibilities within the international community on climate issues, embedding the right to development into every policy. This approach is essential to securing a low-carbon future while addressing the unsustainable consumption patterns of the world's wealthiest. Brazil will host the COP30 in the city of Belém next November. We call on states and non-state actors for fruitful discussions on climate and justice, as well as just transition during that conference. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Pakistan aligns with the statement delivered on behalf of the NAM. We join other delegations in welcoming the distinguished members of the expert mechanism and thank them for presenting the thematic studies on topics that are both urgent and important. As one of the countries that has contributed least yet suffers most from climate change, climate justice remains an imperative for Pakistan. Overcoming challenges of sustainability and financing constraints require the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities to remain at the center stage. We appreciate the thematic study for acknowledging this centrality, as well as for underscoring the need for reform of the global financial architecture. International cooperation is vital to avert climate change's worst impacts and to realize the right to development. The sharp decline in development assistance and conditionalities both are at odds with the right to development. Lastly, Pakistan welcomes discussions on vital cross-cutting themes at the expert mechanism's regular meetings and look forward to continued engagement in support of its mandate. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Madam Vice President, China welcomes the thematic study of the expert mechanism on the right to development, focusing on international development cooperation, climate justice, and women's participation. China notes in the report the withdrawal of major donors, including US aid, and a decline in ODA. which have jeopardized the development of games and multilateralism. China urges countries concerned to fully fulfill their commitments to development aid and climate finance so as to avoid further undermining the rights to subsistence and development for vulnerable groups. The right to development is a universal, inalienable human right, yet developing countries continue to face significant challenges in its full realization. The enduring legacy of colonialism in various forms, coupled by a certain state wielding the big stick of UCM, and as a coercive tool has resulted in adverse outcomes such as economic exploitation, inequality both within and among nations, and structural discrimination, thus directly undermining the rights of women, girls, and vulnerable groups, and severely hindering the enjoyment by the global south of all human rights, including right to development. States concerned must assume their responsibilities. The expert mechanism, the Human Rights Council, and broader international community should give more attention to these violations and adopt concrete measures to address them. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا السيدة نائب الرئيس يرحب وفد جمهورية
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of my country welcomes the expert mechanism on the right to development, and we support their mandate. We're committed to promoting the right to development as a fundamental human right in step with the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, and as this is a roadmap for international and national policies for the right to development. My country underscores the importance of including the right to development in a cross-cutting way within the UN system, including in the treaty bodies, and the international community is called to bolster international cooperation, particularly international partnerships. In conclusion, we call on member states to bolster international cooperation solidarity to address global challenges, in particular poverty, hunger, climate change, and water scarcity, in order to give effect to the right to development. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Eritrea thanks the expert mechanism for its annual report and for advancing the global discourse on the right to development. Reflecting the expert mechanism's findings, Eritrea underscores the importance of cooperation grounded in mutual respect and aligned with national development priorities. We welcome opportunities to reinforce North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation while ensuring that partners are engaged through frameworks that recognize our agency and ownership in shaping development programs. Eritrea values its alignment with principles such as national ownership, non-conditionality, and mutual benefit, principles that resonate with our own development philosophy. In line with the thematic study, Eritrea emphasizes climate justice as a necessary lens for sustainable development. We reaffirm our commitment to equitable climate action that safeguards socioeconomic development, recognizes differentiated responsibilities, and ensures that climate finance mechanisms, including loss and damage, are accessible, fair, and aligned with the needs of vulnerable populations. Eritrea stands ready to work closely with the expert mechanism and fellow member states. We would like to ask the following. How can the mechanism better support states in ensuring that climate justice and the right to development are translated from principle into concrete practice? I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
السيدة نائبة الرئيس يرحب وفد مصر بآلية
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of Egypt welcomes the panel of the expert mechanism and the right to development and emphasizes that the right to development is an inalienable human right in which all people have the right to participate and contribute to the enjoyment of fundamental rights. We are seeing some global challenges that are hindering development efforts, and this requires us to address the need to realize the right to development. It requires concerted international efforts to address the root causes of problems such as debt, and often countries are becoming increasingly indebted to try to ensure services are given to education and healthcare, for example. We hope that we can establish an international covenant to ensure that the right to development be upheld, because often currently many people in the world cannot lay claim to this right. But we must also reiterate the principle that all human rights are interdependent and indivisible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan.
Thank you. يثمن وفد بلادي التقرير السنوي لآلية الخبراء.
My country expresses its thanks for the annual report from the expert mechanism and the thematic studies. We recall the recommendations underscoring the importance of international cooperation based on justice to ensure that developing countries, including Sudan, can achieve sustainable development goals. Our country places particular importance on this right, and we see this through the 2023 strategy based on the principles of sustainable development. However, rebels and militia have undermined the development efforts taken. We've seen the pillaging of resources, and 25,000 people have been killed, and 10 million are now IDPs. Our economy has slowed, and this has affected our development. Armed conflicts jeopardize the possibilities for countries to be able to honor the rights of the people. In light of the challenges of my country, in addition, we have UCMs and debt. Finally, we would call for upholding the development process in spite of the challenges to allow our people to enjoy the right to development. We would call on the international community to bolster international corporations to try to alleviate debt and fund the construction of our country. Interruption.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chad.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of Chad thanks the expert mechanism for their work, and we fully support these efforts. As I was saying, the right to development for us is one of our priorities in the work of the Council, and this should help create social order that allows for the realization of all human rights. LDCs, including Chad, are facing an unprecedented development challenge to try to bring its population out of poverty whilst adapting to climate change. We believe that the right to development is an important mechanism to help bolster this process. We have made some significant efforts in terms of resources in our country, but of course these are under pressure, and we need investment that will create sources to fund for development. Questions for the mechanism now. How do you help fund the needs for countries such as LDCs facing particular difficulties, and sometimes they need to be more restrictive in order to embrace development? And secondly, has the current approach not shown its limitations, and what other options are there for countries in Africa in particular? Then what avenues should be explored perhaps by the Council? Thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. This was the last speaker on my list. We will now turn to the list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-government organizations. I give the floor to Ethiopian Human Rights Commission.
Distinguished President, members of the Human Rights Council, and experts on the rights to development, the Ethiopian Constitution recognizes the right to development and affirms citizens' right to participate in national development and to be consulted on policies and projects that affect their communities. Ethiopia has made effort to align the national development plan with the sustainable development goals, notably through the 10-year development plan. However, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has observed gaps in the implementation of development projects. Armed conflict and insecurity in some parts of the country has affected the right to development due to damage to infrastructure and disruption of services, also diverting attention and resources away from development activities. These challenges have a direct impact on the realization of human rights, including access to education, health, and livelihoods, particularly in conflict-affected areas. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission therefore calls on the government to ensure that human rights-based approach is fully integrated into all stages of development planning and implementation. We also reiterate our call for peaceful dialogue and sustainable conflict resolution. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a joint statement by Civil Development Society.
Madam Vice President, we thank and appreciate the latest report of the expert mechanism on right to development. Right to development is an inalienable right of individuals that leads to realization of all other human rights. People-centric developmental initiatives are the foundation on which right to development is built. Recognizing this fact, there's an augmented focus in India on guaranteeing this right to people through several policy initiatives, including women-oriented interventions, financial inclusion schemes, or increased access to public health, highlighting India's intent to universalize access and opportunity. While India and its people understand the challenges that need to be addressed, the youth of the country feels that we are on the right path with results. As India moves forward in its path of development, the recent terror attack in Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir, which left 26 civilians dead, is a stark reminder that terrorism is a direct affront to right to development of people of Jammu and Kashmir. It was not only an assault on human life, but also on the development aspirations of the region, tourism, livelihoods, and social cohesion. The adverse impact of terrorism that India has been facing over 3 decades, especially in Jammu and Kashmir, has been acutely felt by all Indians and more so by young Kashmiris. Kashmir is not only a geopolitical question, but also a development one. Today, I and my organization seek meaningful understanding of this august audience on the issue, which demands a cohesive and meaningful approach towards terrorism. And I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a joint statement by APG 23.
Madam Vice President, APG 23, the co-signing NGOs welcome the report of the expert mechanism on the right to development and the thematic studies. In the current world scenario, we assist to a very tangible fragility of the multilateral institutional legal framework, with multilateralism, which has been a cornerstone of diplomacy and governance for decades, in a severe crisis. The current conflicts, the disconcerting disregard for international human rights and humanitarian law, the declining trust in international institutions, the rising of nationalism, and challenging in addressing pressing global issues are all obstacles to the realization of a more just and peaceful world, and to the UN Charter's dream for states to act in a spirit of brotherhood as a human family. Indeed, we would like to highlight the importance of the right to development as a holistic approach to addressing global challenges. We also advocate for the draft International Covenant on the Right to Development to be soon adopted to ensure accountability and sustainability. We call for people-centered, human rights-based, transformational and transparent governance in global economic systems, and echo the recommendation of the expert mechanism for a renewed commitment to cooperation, bilateral, multilateral and intergovernmental, to uphold the right to development and create an enabling environment for sustainable progress. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Community Human Rights Advocacy Center.
Madam Chair, as we discuss development as a human right, we must ask whose land, whose voice, and whose future. The expert mechanism has underscored the nexus between climate justice, women's participation, and equitable financial finance. Yet these principles ring hollow if situations like Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir are ignored. Since the unlawful abrogation of Article 370, IOK has been opened to predatory corporate land grabs, reckless lithium and coal extraction, and mega infrastructure projects, all imposed without the free, prior and informed consent of the Kashmiri people. This has unleashed mass deforestation, glacier depletion, and toxic runoff that now endanger the entire Indus Basin. What India brands as development is actually an environmental destruction, economic exploitation, and cultural erasure. IOK epitomizes the report's central warning: when states silence civil society and hand policy to corporations, both human dignity and collective rights are extinguished. We therefore call on the expert mechanism to, number one, undertake an urgent country visit to IOK to assess compliance with right to development principles, and number two, ensure that FFD4 commitment prohibits financing for projects imposed on occupied people without consent.
Thank you. I give the floor to Il Senakolo.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The right to development is one of the basic human rights in order to promote the quality of life and secure the guarantee of men and women. However, what the Sahrawis of Tindouf camps is in total contradiction with the philosophy of the right to development. The host country authorities turned the camps into a lawless space under the control of armed groups, under a complicity between the army and the Algerian authorities that are preventing Sahrawis from the right to development, to ownership, etc. In contrast, the Sahrawis in the southern provinces of the Kingdom of Morocco enjoy policies that promote the right to development, especially through a development initiative launched by the Kingdom of Morocco since 2015, with investments exceeding $8 billion, which improved the environment of education, health, infrastructure, employment opportunities, and this is recognized by all UN reports. That's why we call upon you to observe the situation of the inhabitants of these camps and to hold the host state accountable for the violation of its international obligations and to secure the rights of civilians to enjoy their basic rights to development equally with their peers in the southern governorates of the Kingdom of Morocco.
I give the floor to India Water Foundation.
Thank you, ma'am. India Water Foundation is in alignment to the report of the special rapporteur and recognizing that the climate justice is integral to the right to development. We believe that climate justice must be gender responsive, adequately funded, and rooted in international solidarity. The burdens and the benefits of the climate action should be shared equitably, with special attention to those countries which pollute less but bear the consequences. As an unarguably global north is the historic polluter, India's national mission integrate gender considerations enabling women's leadership in water management and renewable energy adaptation and climate resilience agriculture. The National Adaptation Fund on Climate Change supports community-led solution while targeting financing empower women farmers and entrepreneurs to adopt sustainable practices. India has called for scaled up climate finance beyond the 100 billion USD commitment to the ensure developing nation can pursue low carbon climate resilience pathways without compromising development priorities. We actively promote South-South cooperation, sharing affordable and renewable technology, disaster risk reduction, expertise, etc. India remains committed to ensuring that the climate justice is not an abstract ideal, but as a practical reality, inclusive and effective in safeguarding the planet while advancing the right to development for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to Setim.
Vice President, CETIM welcomes the reports presented by the Expert Mechanism on the Right to Development, which are essential documents that strengthen the universal recognition of this fundamental right. We appreciate the reaffirmation of its individual and collective dimension, as well as the crucial role of international cooperation, climate justice, and the meaningful participation of women in its implementation, which must be ensured at all levels. A notable step forward is the mechanism's characterization of climate justice as a decolonial approach. This highlights the need for an approach that integrates human security, human rights, equity, and participation, while recognizing that systemic transformation is imperative to achieve just and sustainable development. Yet, development cooperation today remains driven by donors, corporations, and financial markets, when it should be based on genuine solidarity. Austerity policies imposed by the IMF and World Bank, disregarding the rights to development, destroy livelihoods and deepen inequalities. CETIM therefore urges the expert mechanism to examine the systemic impediments of this right: militarism, armed conflict, repression of social movements, corporate capture, economic extractivism, and the vestige of colonialism undermining people's sovereignty and self-determination. Madam Vice President, the right to development is not an act of charity. It is the result of daily struggles by people and movements against oppression and domination. CETIM supports these struggles and calls on all states to commit to making this right a tangible reality for all. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a joint statement by Action Canada for Population and Development by video.
Thank you, President. Action Canada makes this statement on behalf of the Sexual Rights Initiative, AVID, Feminist Diplomacy Lab, and ILGA. We welcome the expert mechanism's comprehensive annual report, which clearly articulates why a people-centered human rights approach to the right to development is necessary to address our global crisis. This report comes at a time when global solidarity is fraying due to shrinking international development cooperation, unfulfilled financial pledges, unfair and unequal trade practices and policies, unilateral coercive measures, exclusion and marginalization, disregard for biodiversity and climate change, and economic systems that continue to facilitate genocide and occupation. 10 years after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, and almost 40 years after the Declaration on the Right to Development, we urge states to take overdue actions for the full realization of the right to development. In conclusion, we ask what the role of the expert mechanism may be in the context of the UN80 initiative, especially since achieving the right to development appears increasingly out of reach. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Abshar Atefaha Charity Institute by video.
Atefaha Charity Institute, through impediments on the implementation of rights to development. Mr. President, the right to development is explicitly recognized in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and reiterated in the United Nations Declaration on the Right to Development, emphasizing development as an inalienable human right requiring participation, equality, and sustainability. Four main barriers impede the realization of this right today. First, persistent poverty restricts access to resources and opportunities needed for economic and social progress. Second, armed conflicts disrupt development by destroying infrastructure and displacing populations, undermining stability essential for growth. Third, systemic inequalities, whether based on gender, ethnicity, or class, limit equitable participation, perpetuating exclusion from development benefits. Fourth, climate change inflicts severe environmental degradation, threatening livelihoods and hindering sustainable development efforts. As an organization specialized in development and empowerment, we urge the Human Rights Council's expert mechanisms to adopt more focused efforts, not only to address these key obstacles, but also to expose and mitigate the risks posed by these aggravating factors to the right to development and the broader human rights framework.
Thank you. I give the floor to Chunghui Children's Foundation by video.
Chunhui Children operates Chunhui Mama program for orphaned and special needs children aged 0 to 18 years. The program embraces inclusive education, follows the lifelong management of the whole child philosophy, designs courses based on the children's ages and developmental needs, and creates appropriate learning opportunities for each child so as to promote their holistic development. The program also trains almost 1,000 frontline Chunhui mamas to provide responsive care for the children, help them develop secure attachment, and pay consistent attention to their needs. The goal is to help the children thrive in family-like love and care. Chunhui Mama is not only the name of one of our programs, but also the title of women working with our programs in welfare institutions. And they serve both as mamas and as teachers of the children. Since it was launched, the program has benefited more than 210,000 children and trained more than 28,000 frontline Chunhui mamas.
Thank you. I give the floor to United Towns Agency for North-South Cooperation. Thank you. I give the floor to Promotion to Development, Economic and Social, PDES.
السيدة نائبة الرئيس، تود منظمتنا أن تذكر بأن التنفيذ الفعلي للحق في التنمية ما يزال يواجه عوائق عميقة في عدة مناطق، ولا سيما في منطقة شمال إفريقيا ومنطقة الساحل. ففي هاتين المنطقتين ما تزال الآثار المترابطة للنزاعات المسلحة والإرهاب وتغير المناخ وعدم الاستقرار السياسي تغذي الفقر وتفاقم أوجه عدم
exacerbate inequalities and undermine access to fundamental rights. The report of the expert mechanism rightly underlines that without security, inclusive governance, and international cooperation, the right to development cannot be achieved. The peoples of North Africa and Sahel region face rising poverty rates, persistent gender-based discrimination, widespread school drop-ups, high levels of child mortality, and insufficient access to healthcare. Such indicators not only reflect delays in development, but also constitute a direct violation of human rights. The region also faces significant disparities in levels of development and access to rights, highlighting the need for more coherent and equitable regional policies. We reiterate that the right to development must go hand in hand with fair and sustainable management of natural resources. In a way that respects social and climate justice. We call the Council and the expert mechanism to. President interrupts.
That was the last speaker we could accommodate for this debate. I now give the floor to Mr. Boni Ibawo for his concluding remarks. Mr. Ibawo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I thank the delegates, distinguished delegates, for your intervention and for the support of the mechanism. I note the engagement of states and distinguished delegates with the studies that we have produced. Particularly welcome the engagement with the study on climate justice and the study on international development cooperation. I also note and welcome the support that have been expressed by delegates for the draft legally binding instrument, the Covenant on the Right to Development, now going through intergovernmental negotiation in New York. It is gratifying that delegates, states, and NGO are robustly engaged with this process. I'm particularly pleased that the European Union has declared a continued commitment to be engaged in this process. I also want to note the engagement of the UNDP on many of the issues raised in my report, particularly the response to the call for participation of marginalized people in climate mitigation and adaptation strategy. It is also worthy to note and that the UNDP is working with states and other stakeholders to ensure that climate justice principles outlined in our studies are fulfilled. I will now spend some time answering some of the specific questions that were directed. Before I do so, however, I want to place on record the intervention of small islands developing states, notably the Marshall Islands and Vanuatu, and the points they make about the centrality of climate justice to any mitigation and remediation efforts to address climate change. The small island development states bear the brunt of the devastation of climate change, and so it is important that their perspective are considered when we have these conversations about climate change and climate justice. I also note the point made by several delegates and member states about the centrality of the right to development to the operationalization of Agenda 2030 for sustainable development at both national and international levels. The questions from Iran and Eritrea centered on what suggestions the mechanism might have on how to operationalize the right to development, particularly with regard to the obstacles that confront the implementation of the right to development. My annual report and the two studies presented today offer some concrete steps on what states can do to address these challenges, which we also identify in this study. The right to development is a national obligation, but it is also an international obligation. States have the primary obligation to fulfill the right and operationalize the right to development. The states also have a duty to cooperate. So the right to development has a uniquely international dimension. In addressing the obstacles to the right to development, one of the points emphasized in both reports presented today is participation, that states must put in place structures, institutions, and mechanisms that ensure that those affected by development policies have a say, a meaningful say, in policies and actions that affect their development. On the questions of the international dimensions of the right to development, states also have an obligation to cooperate, as outlined in the Declaration on the Right to Development, to ensure that development has a positive impact on the lives of ordinary people, particularly the most marginalized. Colombia has asked how the instrument, the draft legally binding instrument, can ensure that businesses do not pose obstacles to the right to development. Although states are the primary duty bearers for the fulfillment and operationalization of the right to development, this mechanism recognizes that operationalizing the right to development is not an exclusive obligation of states. Non-state actors also play a critical role in the right to development. The draft covenant on the right to development, currently going through intergovernmental negotiations in New York, has elaborate provisions for implementation, including provisions for a conference of parties. We believe that these implementation mechanisms enshrined in the draft legally binding instruments will be effective in holding not just states accountable, but also non-state actors for their obligations to operationalizing the right to development. On the question from the distinguished delegate from Eritrea on how the mechanism can support member states to ensure that climate justice principles are translated into practice, our mechanism has provided some very concrete principles and suggestions, good practices, as we call them, that states may adopt individually or collectively to ensure the operationalization of the right to development. On climate justice, our mechanism has recommended the development of climate finance hubs to provide capacity to states and non-state actors to ensure climate justice in mitigation and adaptation initiatives. The mechanism has also recommended the creation of dedicated climate justice funds and national and international ombudspersons responsible for ensuring that those who have contributed the least to the climate crisis do not disproportionately bear the burden of climate change. Finally, a question from Chad on how to ensure funding for LDCs. Our mechanism believes that international cooperation and capacity building is central to addressing these questions. We have recommended in these studies I've presented today and other studies, a point that's been made in these deliberations for a reform of the international financial architecture to ensure that the system serves the needs of developing states and do not pose an obstacle to the right to development. I'd like to close by once again thanking delegates for the robust engagement with our mechanism, for the support we have enjoyed from the mechanism. And I would like to use this opportunity to welcome delegates, states, international organizations, and non-governmental organizations to the 12th session of the expert mechanism that will be taking place here in Geneva between the 27th and 29th October. Welcome your participation, welcome your engagement. The thematic studies of the expert mechanisms are often based on deliberations that come from our sessions. And so we welcome your continued engagement with this mechanism. I thank you.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. I wish to thank Mr. Ibabo for his participation. We will take a short break before holding the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of slavery. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, we will now begin the interactive dialogue with Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of slavery. It is my pleasure to welcome the Special Rapporteur, Mr. Tomoya Obokata. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. I now give the floor to Mr. Tomoya Obokata to present his reports.
Thank you. Madam Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I have the honor of addressing the Council today in my capacity as the Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of slavery. To begin with, I unconditionally denounce the US government sanctions on the Special Rapporteur on occupied Palestinian territory and express my full solidarity with Francesca Albanese. Sanctioning a Special Rapporteur appointed by the Council violates international law and is a direct attack on the integrity of the UN human rights system, including the special procedures as a whole. I call on all states to act decisively to denounce these sanctions and refuse to carry them out. I also call on the United States to immediately withdraw these illegal sanctions. In November last year, I undertook a visit to Australia. I would like to thank over 500 governmental and non-governmental stakeholders whom I met for their constructive engagement and cooperation during my visit. I will now highlight some of the key findings. I would like to commend Australia for its robust legal frameworks and strong commitment and leadership to combat contemporary forms of slavery. Recently, important progress has been achieved through the appointment of the Federal Anti-Slavery Commissioner, provision of responses to the review of the Modern Slavery Act, and numerous promising projects, including the Support for Trafficked People program, the Workplace Justice Visa, and the Strengthening Reporting Protections pilot scheme. I also warmly welcome Australia's regional and global leadership through initiatives such as the Bali Process and ASEAN Act. Nevertheless, challenges remain which must be fully addressed. These include high risks of exploitation faced by migrant workers, including those under the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme, as well as asylum seekers. Further challenges lie in ensuring adequate labour inspections, stronger regulation over labour hire and recruitment agents, as well as in guaranteeing equal access to basic protection and essential services such as healthcare, legal assistance, and social support. Concerns also persist in relation to the segregated employment and sub-minimum wages for persons with disabilities, the enduring impact of colonial legacies on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, ongoing discrimination experienced by sex workers, and inconsistencies in legislative and protection frameworks across states and territories. In addition, while the Modern Slavery Act has improved awareness among businesses, its limited enforcement powers and the absence of mandatory human rights due diligence provision continue to restrict its practical impact. Nevertheless, in light of Australia's significant achievements to date and its continued constructive engagement with civil society, workers' organizations, and businesses, I believe that these challenges can be overcome through concerted action. With regard to other country visits, I just returned from Brazil, and my full report will be presented next year. I also welcome invitations extended by Serbia and Guatemala. Madam Vice President, I now would like to provide a summary of my new thematic report on the worst forms of child labor. As you know, under SDG Target 8.7, states and the international community pledged themselves to end child labor in all its forms by the end of this year. However, estimated 138 million children remain subjected to labor worldwide, with 54 million in hazardous forms. In my report, I documented widespread and diverse forms of hazardous work, particularly in sectors such as agriculture, livestock, fishery, construction, mining, and domestic work, most of which are informal in nature, sexual exploitation, which has dramatically increased in a digital environment, recruitment in armed conflicts, and exploitation in criminal activities such as drug production and trafficking. The persistence of worst forms of child labor stems from structural, legal, economic, and social barriers, and I will name just a few examples in this regard. Many national laws fail to address new challenges such as digital exploitation, and the informal economy is poorly regulated, which facilitates exploitation and abuse. Furthermore, lack of reliable data on child labor hampers victim identification and accountability, and child protection systems, particularly trauma-informed services, are fragmented and underfunded. Also, children forced into crime or prostitution are often punished rather than protected, undermining the principle of non-punishment. In addition, many businesses fail to identify child labor risks in their value chains. And finally, poverty, armed conflicts, displacement, gender inequality, a lack of access to education and social protection, and the demand for cheap labor all perpetuate child labor in all regions of the world. I wish to acknowledge, however, that several promising initiatives have been implemented by states in order to address these ongoing challenges to eliminate child labor in all its forms. For example, many states have amended their legal frameworks in line with the international standards, including the creation of a list of hazardous work and the prohibition of online and offline sexual and criminal exploitation of children. Others have also strengthened human rights due diligence and other measures to compel businesses to identify and mitigate the risks of child labor. In addition, a number of states have enhanced institutional frameworks by establishing interministerial or agency bodies dedicated to identifying the worst forms of child labor and protecting victims, including securing their access to justice and remedies. Finally, I wish to acknowledge the crucial role played by civil society and workers' organizations, as they are at the forefront of addressing child labor in all its forms, despite the fact that many are suffering from shrinking funding and civic space. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, despite these positive developments, the 2025 target is unattainable under the current trajectories. To move forward, states must prioritize prevention of child labor through education, social protection, and labor rights, strengthen enforcement and accountability, expand international cooperation, and adopt a smart mix of measures to strengthen human rights due diligence obligations for businesses. It is of critical importance that children themselves, especially survivors of labor, sexual, and criminal exploitation, are meaningfully included in policy design and development. Madam Vice President, next year marks the centenary of the Slavery Convention adopted here in Geneva in 1926. I urge the Council to seize this opportunity to renew the collective commitment and action for the elimination of contemporary forms of slavery in all countries. I also call on you to provide much-needed funding support for the UN Voluntary Trust Fund for Contemporary Forms of Slavery. It issues grants to civil society organizations which provide life-saving support to victims and survivors, but this year it has so far only received one single small contribution, and I count on your support in this regard. Finally, this is my last interactive dialogue as a special rapporteur. I would like to thank the Council, Member States, as well as non-governmental stakeholders for their engagement and support during my tenure. There is still so much more to be done to eliminate contemporary forms of slavery, but I am confident that the next appointee will take the mandate even further, and I would like to wish him or her every success. In the meantime, I look forward to fulfilling my duties for the remainder of my term. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, according to our practice, we will start by hearing from the delegation of the country concerned. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia. You have 5 minutes.
President, Australia remains committed to countering modern slavery both at home and abroad. On behalf of Australia's federal, state and territory governments, we thank you, Special Rapporteur, for your comprehensive engagement and insights during your visit to Australia in November 2024. Special Rapporteur, your report highlights many strengths in Australia's response, including strong legal and institutional frameworks to address modern slavery, priority placed on survivor engagement and empowerment, recent reforms to further address migrant worker exploitation risks, and that Australia's supply chain transparency legislation, the Modern Slavery Act 2018, has increased businesses' understanding and action to address modern slavery risks. Since the Special Rapporteur's visit, Australia has appointed the first Australian Anti-Slavery Commissioner, commenced public consultation on options to strengthen our transparency legislation, launched the Modern Slavery in Australia website, a public awareness tool available in 249 languages, introduced a new forced marriage specialist support program to provide individual needs-based support to people in or at risk of forced marriage, developed practice guidelines for organisations working with people in or at risk of modern slavery in consultation with civil society and survivors, continued engagement with people with lived experience to inform development of policies and programs, including through a Survivor Advisory Council, and commenced an audit of government procurement procedures and supply chains to explore practical ways to better trace modern slavery risks. Special Rapporteur, we will continue to build on the recommendations in your report and our existing work to prevent modern slavery, including through broader efforts to promote human rights and address disadvantage as a potential driver of exploitation. In relation to migrant worker concerns in Australia, the government has continued implementation of recent reforms to combat migrant worker exploitation and increase safeguards for temporary work programs. 2 projects are underway to strengthen protection from visa cancellation when reporting exploitation and to enable extended stays for those pursuing workplace justice. The government has also introduced a new criminal offence for intentional wage theft. On the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility PALM scheme, we are enhancing pre-departure and arrival briefings to ensure information provided to workers is clear, accurate and accessible, supporting better understanding and more successful engagement with the scheme. And we continue to implement strategies to more effectively prevent, deter, detect and respond to disengagement of workers within the PALM scheme. Internationally, Australia has continued its leadership and engagement as one of only a few countries with a dedicated ambassador to counter modern slavery, driving regional and international cooperation on traditional and emerging issues, such as the threat posed by trafficking into online scam centres for forced criminality. Over the past year, we have stepped up efforts with our partners in Southeast Asia to raise global awareness of online scam centres and offer recommendations on strengthening the international response, given our experience in the region. In June, the ASEAN Australia Counter-Trafficking Program, ASEAN Act, supported the development and launch of an ASEAN guideline on implementing the non-punishment principle, ensuring victims of trafficking are not penalised for unlawful acts committed as a direct result of their trafficking experience. ASEAN Act has also supported the development of an ASEAN guideline on preventing child and forced marriage in the context of trafficking in persons, expected to be launched later this year. Special Rapporteur, your report is a valuable source of information and stakeholder views as the government continues building on its response to modern slavery, in line with Australia's National Action Plan to combat modern slavery. Thank you once again, Special Rapporteur, for your engagement and commitment to eradicating modern slavery in all its forms. Thank you.
Thank you. The list of speakers is now closed. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions to the Special Rapporteur and make comments on his report. The speaking time is 1 minute and 30 seconds for all. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait on behalf of Cooperation Council of the Arab States of the Gulf, GCC.
سيدة نائبة الرئيس، أخذ الدول المجلس علما بما ورد في تقرير المقرر.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The members of the Gulf Cooperation Council have acknowledged the report of the Special Rapporteur, and we would underscore the importance of reinforcing international cooperation, establishing multilateral partnerships. We are proud in the GCC of efforts undertaken to protect children. We were amongst the first regional groups to ratify the ILO Convention 182 on the worst forms of child labor. We are proud to be part of the We Protect Alliance to combat sexual exploitation of children in the digital sphere. To this end, the countries of GCC have said that their partnership with the ILO through the Joint Plan of Action 2025 to 2029 to strengthen dignified work on sustainable development. This is part of our efforts to try to combat the worst forms of child labor. Finally, we place protection of children's rights and the right to development and safety at the very heart of our priorities. We will continue our work with international partners to eradicate all forms of exploitation and to achieve the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg on behalf of a group of countries.
Madam Vice President, I had the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Benelux countries aligned with the EU statement. We thank the Special Rapporteur for his report. We are appalled by the fact that millions of children remain trapped in hazardous work, exploitation and abuse, despite the global pledge to end child labor by 2025 under SDG 8.7. Children belong in schools, and we must all uphold our commitment under SDG 4.1 to ensure free and quality education for every child. The number of children recruited and used in armed conflicts is unacceptable, and some are even recruited online beyond conflict zones. States must criminalize these abuses and treat affected children primarily as victims. Regulating the digital environment used to recruit, traffic, and exploit children is also essential. We urge states to implement all relevant human rights, humanitarian and labor standards, in particular the Convention on the Rights of the Child and its optional protocols. Protecting children from labor is not optional. It demands collective and urgent actions to bring it to an end now, not in 5 years. Mr. Special Rapporteur, what are the most immediate and impactful steps this Council should take to eliminate child labor? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Madam Vice President, the EU thanks the Special Rapporteur for your work. We share your urgent call for collective action, and the EU and its member states remain firmly committed to eradicating child labor. We call for the universal ratification and implementation of the relevant ILO conventions. The EU strategy on the rights of the child supports access to free quality education, social and legal protection, stronger labor inspections in partner countries, and relevant judicial procedures to punish perpetrators of crimes against children. The EU has committed 10% of its humanitarian aid budget to education in emergencies, a measure that also helps reduce child labor. The EU has adopted the Forced Labor Regulation, banning products made with forced labor, including child labor, as well as the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which requires large companies to address human rights risks in their supply chains, including child labor. The EU Sustainable Cocoa Initiative promotes sustainable practices, including child labor prevention in cocoa production. Mr. Special Rapporteur, what are your recommendations on how best to take into account the perspectives of children and families in the design and implementation of efforts to end the exploitation of children for once and all? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ghana on behalf of Group of African States.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The African Group thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report, which highlights the manifestations of the worst forms of child labor and the persistent difficulties in eliminating these practices, despite the progress made in this area, particularly by states. The African Group notes with indignation the persistence of the exploitation of millions of children throughout the world and remains deeply concerned by the negative impact of this scourge on numerous sustainable development goals, particularly those relating to the rights to education and health, the eradication of poverty, and the reduction of inequalities. The group endorses the Special Rapporteur's conclusions and recommendations on this issue and calls for greater action at the national level to strengthen national tools for detecting and combating acts of child slavery, particularly in the workplace and online. The African Group will also continue to work towards achieving the objectives of the 10-year plan for the eradication of child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, and modern slavery in Africa, within the framework of the African Union's Agenda 2063, and calls on partners to strengthen their support to African countries in this regard. We thank the Special Rapporteur for his dedicated service. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Estonia on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Nordic Baltic states. We thank the Special Rapporteur for his latest report, which provides crucial insights into the ongoing challenges related to eliminating the worst forms of child labor. The data presented therein paint a deeply concerning picture of the persistence, prevalence of these abuses worldwide. While the 2025 target to end all forms of child labor reflects a vital global commitment, it remains far from within reach. These figures highlight the need for a renewed political will and coordinated global action. We echo the Special Rapporteur's emphasis on the need to sensitize the public through a holistic, community-based approach to challenge the norms sustaining the worst forms of child labor. Raising awareness at the community level is key to ending work in conditions of slavery. In parallel, the growing use of digital technologies, though beneficial in many ways, has also brought new risks and opened the door to new forms of exploitation. The growing misuse of cyberspace highlights the urgent need to ensure child labor protection in the digital environment. Mr. Special Rapporteur, what steps can be taken to improve compliance with laws against the worst forms of child labor? I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to distinguished representative of Holy See.
Madam Vice President, child labor is a grave violation of human dignity, since every child is a unique and unrepeatable masterpiece of God. Exploiting them through labor, sometimes of the worst forms, is an ancient scourge and a betrayal of their innocence. It's also one of the most heinous assaults on their human rights. It's a failure for humanity as a whole that our century that generates artificial intelligence and plans multiplanetary existences has not yet reckoned with the scourge of humiliated, exploited, mortally wounded childhood. The family plays a crucial role in tackling the root causes of child labor in all its forms. When the family is weakened by poverty, division, uncertainty, and despair, it's the children who suffer most, sometimes becoming victims of exploitation. In some cases, parents themselves give their own children to exploiters. The Holy See is also deeply concerned about the continued recruitment and indiscriminate use of children in armed conflicts, as well as the growing misuse of digital technologies to radicalize them and incite their participation. These are scandalous and ongoing forms of child labor that the report rightly condemns. The Holy See therefore encourages states to work towards the universal ratification and effective implementation of the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the involvement of
Thank you.
children in armed conflict.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mongolia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Mongolia takes note with appreciation the latest report of the Special Rapporteur, which highlights both global progress and persistent challenges in eradicating the worst forms of child labor. We share the concerns raised, particularly regarding child labor and high-risk and informal sectors, and appreciate the emphasis on the need for comprehensive, child-centered approaches. In Mongolia, we continue to face challenges in areas such as artisanal mining, herding, and domestic work, especially in rural and remote regions. At the same time, we reaffirm our strong commitment to eliminating child labor through coordinated national efforts. Mongolia has ratified core international conventions, and our revised labor and child protection laws focus on coordinated efforts to identify, prevent, and withdraw children from exploitative labor. We continue to strengthen national capacities through enhanced labor inspection mechanisms, expansion of child-sensitive social protection, increased access to quality education, and improved data collection systems. Mongolia welcomes continued dialogue and cooperation with the United Nations system, international partners, civil society, and communities to ensure that every child is protected from exploitation and able to live and learn in dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of UNICEF.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. UNICEF welcomes the report of the Special Rapporteur and shares his concerns that despite progress, the world remains off track to eliminate child labor. In 2024, an estimated 138 million children were engaged in child labor, including about 54 million in hazardous work likely to jeopardize their health, safety, or development, according to ILO and UNICEF's 2025 estimates. Other worst forms of child labor remain largely hidden and unquantified due to their illicit nature and a lack of reliable data. While the progressive elimination of child labor is a sustainable development goal, international standards make clear that the eradication of its worst forms is an immediate and urgent obligation and must be prioritized. UNICEF supports the Special Rapporteur's call for full implementation of international human rights, humanitarian, and labor law. Children exploited in the worst form of child labor must be recognized as victims and provided with the care and protection to which they are entitled. We also welcome the Special Rapporteur's focus on addressing root causes, including through education, social protection, and strengthened child protection systems. UNICEF remains committed to supporting states in fulfilling their obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and its optional protocols in support of the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sovereign Order of Malta by video.
Mr. President, the Sovereign Order of Malta would like to thank the Special Rapporteur, Professor Tomoya Obokata, for his report on the worst forms of child labor. The Order of Malta is gravely concerned about the hundreds of millions of children who are victims of forced labor and other forms of slavery. Despite a large set of international standards established by the international community in various regional human rights courts, impunity reigns, and millions of children are still subjected to inhuman treatment. To combat this scourge that corrodes our society, we must address its root causes, especially the socio-economic ones. More importantly, we must return to the spiritual foundations of human rights. Mr. President, the Sovereign Order of Malta continues its centuries-old mission of serving the poorest by supporting children in need in conflict zones and elsewhere. Here are two examples. In Syria, where decades of conflict and humanitarian crisis have forced children into labor, Malteser International, our relief agency, provides displaced families with basic necessities. In Ukraine, Malteser International provides targeted support for children, including medical and psychological assistance. In conclusion, the Sovereign Order of Malta welcomes the promising practices adopted by many countries, as noted by the Special Rapporteur. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Gabon.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Présidente.
Thank you, Vice President. Gabon aligns with the statement by the African Group and congratulates the Special Rapporteur on the clear report. My country remains concerned by the worst forms of child labour, which have their root causes mainly in poverty and irregular immigration. These undermine the implementation of the SDGs, particularly 8.7. To address this, Gabon has ratified a number of international legal instruments, including ILO Conventions 138 on minimum age and 182 on the worst form of child labour, as well as the Palermo Protocol. Nationally, we've adopted legislation to prohibit work by children aged under 16 and define the worst forms of work and the categories of business prohibited to children aged under 18. A 2001 ordinance has been added to the criminal code in order severely to punish exploitation and unlawful work by children. And there are new provisions planned to criminalize trafficking. We've also established an interministerial committee to combat child trafficking and taken measures to build on free public education in order to reduce children's vulnerability to exploitation. However, beyond this legal and institutional arsenal, we believe that innovative solutions such as the use of digital tools are crucial to provide a lasting, effective response to this scourge. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Dominican Republic.
Señor President, my country thanks the Special Rapporteur for recognizing our progress and presenting the report which identifies ongoing obstacles and promising initiatives to address the worst forms of child labour. We emphasize the link between SDG 8.7 and children's rights. Our country has made new progress in reducing child labour and strengthened its normative framework under Resolution 10/2023, which increases protection against dangerous work. Social programs such as Opportunity 1424, Superate, and the Extended School Day contribute to improving education and social protection for thousands of children. We are proud to inform you that the recent reform of the Criminal Code provides a broader criminalization with stronger sanctions for all forms of child labour and removes any statute of limitation from the most severe crimes against humanity. This is in addition to the amendment to the trafficking law of 2024. There are still challenges, but we reiterate our country's commitment to eradicating child labour and ensuring that all children remain in school as an essential route to prevention. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nigeria.
Madam Vice President, Nigeria thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report and takes note of the recommendation to protect children from slavery, forced labor, and exploitation. Children are among the most vulnerable and must be protected, yet many remain exposed to worst forms of child labor. The protection of children remains central to Nigeria's national priorities. We have established key legal frameworks to combat this issue, in addition to Trafficking in Persons Enforcement and Administrative Act, the Child Idle Act, Exploitation, Economic Activities and Hazard Work, while the Labour Act sets minimum requirements and regulates working conditions for minors. Our commitment is further reinforced by national policy on child labour, which provides a strategic framework for eliminating child labour across various sectors. And the Compulsory Free Universal Basic Education Act guarantees education for all children. Beyond legislation, Nigeria addresses the root causes of child labour by tackling poverty and inequality through social protection programs that support low-income households. In addition, specialized units within our law enforcement agency investigate and combat cyber-enabled crimes, including online exploitation of children. Finally, Nigeria will continue to strengthen its efforts to eradicate child labor. How can global cooperation be strengthened to ensure every child everywhere is protected?
you.